it is it's a day that's going to live in infamy. And, it's Pearl Harbor, it's Czechoslovakia, and it's really an attack on the Western world. A free, democratic European nation was attacked by 3,000 tanks in Europe, not defended, with a nuclear threat umbrella. It's a devastating war. We don't know the outcome. We don't know the outcome of most wars. And of course, it's rolling oil markets, food markets, and it's changing everyone's mind about national security around everything, whether it's food, energy, technology, et cetera. It's a chance for the Western world to get its act together. The autocratic world thinks that the Western world's a little lazy and incompetent. There's a little bit of truth to that. This is the chance to get our act together and to solidify the Western free, democratic, capitalist, free people, free movements, freedom of speech, freedom of religion for the next century. Because if we don't get this one right, that kind of chaos you can see around the world for the next 50 years.
There have been a lot of Lehman comparisons made in recent weeks and months with regards to the fallout from the energy crisis. You are the only Wall Street CEO who is around to navigate the global financial crisis. How worried are you about Europe this winter, given everything that's going on in Ukraine and with the energy supply?
Yeah, well, I think we're getting energy completely wrong, which is, ever since this war started, you've known that Europe was going to have a problem, and that it was pretty predictable that Putin was going to cut off some gas and certain oil, and oil price would go up. And by the way, for the climate folks here, it's made the climate worse, because people had this bad assumption that high oil prices and gas prices will reduce consumption, reduce CO2. No. Poor nations, India, China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, are turning back on coal plants, as are rich nations called Germany, Netherlands, France. We have it completely backwards. And in my view, America should have been pumping more oil and gas, and it should have been supported. We're trying to have our cake and eat it too a little bit. And so you have the problem this winter, which it sounds like they've got enough supply to get through this winter, but we have a longer term problem now, which is the world is not producing enough oil and gas to reduce coal, make the transition, create security for people. So I would put it in a critical category. And this should be treated almost as a matter of war at this point, not as nothing short of that. So, people don't be surprised. Like, I was not surprised at Nord Stream 1 being blown up. I wouldn't be surprised if it's another pipeline or a tanker in the wrong place. And people need to be prepared at this one, and obviously America needs to play a real leadership role. America is the swing producer, not Saudi Arabia. And we should have gotten that right starting in March. It's almost too late to get it right, because obviously these are longer term investments.
Speaking of getting it right with regards to Saudi Arabia, President Biden was heavily criticized for his efforts in the Middle East, OPEC going ahead with their production cuts despite President Biden pushing against that. How would you say the Biden administration has handled things, and has Biden been strong enough?
I think they've done a good job. I obviously don't agree with everything the administration's done. And I think all of us need to focus more on growth agendas, which we really don't do very much of. But I think they've done a very good job coalescing the Western world, keeping it together around this war in Ukraine. And that's good. That needs to be sustained, because this can go on for years. The notion this might end right away, I think, is a false notion. I think we should have and could have done more on oil and gas. I think, if you're an American leader, obviously you're going to deal with people that you may not want to deal with. I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia. FDR and Winston Churchill dealt with Stalin. And I think people are making a mistake to have butterflies and roses and stuff like that. That's not what this is. And obviously we should be working with Saudi Arabia. They've been a longtime ally. They are a producer of oil and gas. I don't know what the private conversations are. I do think that in the long run, they are far better off aligning with America than with some of those other folks. And I think they probably know that, and I assume that was part of the president's conversation.
Let's take it back to markets.
I should remind people, it's still the American military that protects all that oil flow around the world, including the oil going to China.
I want to just circle back to your initial comments around Russia, Ukraine. You seem particularly concerned about this war and its impact. Do you see Putin using tactical nuclear weapons?
I couldn't possibly comment on that any more than you know. So, yeah.
And if you could,
but what comment I will make? Nuclear proliferation is still the greatest threat to mankind. Okay, if we're not sitting here in 200 years, it'll be because of nuclear proliferation. And I do think this is an example that how important it is. And I think Putin also taught the world that having a nuclear weapon gives you pretty much authority to bully any neighbor you want.
I think there's so much happening right now around the globe. We've been waiting for this conversation. You know what's happening in markets. You know what's happening in the economy. You know what's happening with consumers. What do you see right now? I think everybody was concerned, what was it, 6 months ago when you said a hurricane is coming, you better prepare?
Yeah, so I didn't really say that. But let's just start by saying the United States economy is the strongest economy in the world today. So we should celebrate that a little bit. And that's why capital's coming here, business is coming here, is still growing. If you look in the short run, the consumer is spending 10% more than last year and 40% more than pre-COVID. They're spending it in different things. So all your speakers up here, some are doing better, some are doing worse. That's a tremendous sum of money, and they have $1.5 trillion still in their checking accounts more than pre-COVID. So the spending is down. That's the good news. And the companies are in good shape, too, by the way, and their balance sheet, consumer balance sheet is in great shape. The other news, which is not good, is that rates are now, 4% on their way to 5%. Inflation is eroding everything I just said, and that $1.5 trillion will run out sometime mid-year next year. And so when you're looking out forward, those things may very well derail the economy and cause this mild or hard recession that people are worried about. But far more important than that, by the way, is all the geopolitical stuff.
It's a big distinction between mild and harsh.
5%. You said 5%. You really think that's where rates are going to stop, the terminal rate?
I think the Fed has made it clear they're going to get to 5 and stop for a while. I read a while as 3 to 6 months. That may not be sufficient.
You'd still go to 5 if the 10-year stays anchored at 3.5, or you don't think it will? You think the 10-year's headed back up?
I think that you have to look at the other risk we have is quantitative tightening. We've never had it before, ever in the lifetime of mankind. So I look at that as something we should be quite concerned about. And, the suppression of the 10-year bond rate has been going on for 20 years, and it can't really be suppressed anymore. And, QT has just started, so it's very possible. And if you have, 2% on inflation, you should have a 4% bond today. So I don't look at this like it's got to go get better than here. Obviously, it's a risk on trade. But that mindset may change if inflation sticks around a little bit longer.
You said geopolitics is really the issue that we need to watch.
Yeah. So you have this economy, but then you have oil, food, fertilizer, war, humanitarian crisis. We've not had a war in Europe like this since 1945. Right. And back then we said never again. And it's again. And then, of course, it's causing all this people rethinking secure lines and China and trade. And there's a lot of geopolitical upheaval. And add to that, by the way, there are a lot of emerging market countries that a lot of people don't focus on are going to pay a heavy price because of the strong dollar, higher rates, and higher oil prices. And so that stuff is really significant. I don't think we've seen that kind of turmoil in the global world for a long time. And what I said about a hurricane, I said that's storm clouds that could mitigate. It could be a hurricane. We simply don't know. And I think, as a risk manager, I prepare for both. But I'm not guessing which one's going to happen. I simply don't know.
As a risk manager, which one looks like the more likely scenario?
I don't know.
So
I put that whole mix of stuff and turmoil to be worried about. And we need great American leadership to resolve those issues. And so that's the most important part.